All right, a new essay. And I apologize in advance. I haven't done enough research to confirm my pronunciation of some of these foreign terms, but either way, here we go. This one built around the word chapter, from the Old French chapitre, meaning the main division of a book, from the late Latin capitulum, meaning main part, or literally little head, a diminutive of caput, head, but also leader, guide, chief person, and figuratively life, as in, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Prologue. Jesus was a grave robber to begin with. I think that is a good place to start. At the head of this chapter, an arresting hook about the head of our salvation. He was also a master poker player, which pronouncement may seem a tad sacrilegious, pairing the sacred with the sinful and all, but wasn't that the whole point from the beginning? Ascension by way of condescension? The whole plan was a gamble. And let us not forget that in the beginning, too, was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, which makes us, at first at least, a lot of little phonemes and letters looking to become words of significance. And then those same words looking to join other words in an effort to form complete sentences. And then, in turn, paragraphs, pages, and finally, entire books with intertwining, inspiring stories of broken hearts made whole. Chapter 1. My oldest brother, whose story was made very short on account of his own broken heart, lies buried in Seattle on a grassy knoll marked by a tiny gravestone. And on that gravestone, quite simply, his name and date of birth, and just a few weeks after that, the day he passed away. No etched picture or scripture or sentimental aside, because what is there to say when you lose someone before they've even had time to grow beyond that tiny bundled unit of spoken sound cradled in your quiet arms? Chapter 2. In a deck of cards, there are court cards, jack, queen, king, and then there are numeral cards, all marked with small, easily identifiable symbols that determine the card's suit and rank. Aces can, to your advantage, most often be used interchangeably as lowly ones or as the most powerful card in the deck. And isn't that how life is too, according to Scripture anyway? The last shall be first, and the first shall be last, and if you wish to be highly valued, be low. And if you are low, then rejoice, because you can be lifted high. Chapter 3. I have a lot of books. So many, in fact, that people often wonder how on earth I find time to read them all. Which makes me think, who says I have to read them all on earth? If there are not books in heaven, I'll be dead. Well, there are books in heaven. Chapter 4. Speaking of small, easily identifiable symbols, on the open hands of Jesus Christ, our Prince of Peace, those violent, indelible prints for peace, which speak to both his suit and rank. Chapter 5. I played poker for the first time the other night. My oldest, who is named after my late brother, taught me the rules of the game, including terms like the flop, turn, and river, which last card, when flipped over, can make or break your hand. No money was involved, though, just this enticing pot of candy on the gas fire pit, around which we huddled late into the night, eagerly showing each other our hands. Chapter 6. My ex-wife, who initially took a much appreciated gamble on me and our life together, and with whom by the turn I drew 4 jacks, liked to tell people that I would read the books on my shelf all at once, by which she meant I sometimes stood there in front of them reminiscing, and that every so often I would reach out for one whose spine was particularly worn, then flip through it and stop randomly, because I knew it so well I could on any given page find a dog ear or an asterisk in the margin, or a highlighted paragraph, or a feverishly underlined sentence, or an insightful thought scribbled between the lines, which is where we often have to read if we are to understand books and people, but especially people. Chapter 7. My grandpa is buried in Oklahoma. But his son, my uncle, who died from a drug overdose with easily identifiable marks on his arms, wasn't buried at all. Rather, his ashes, we think, were spread somewhere by his girlfriend, who soon after preceded him in death and took with her to the grave that unknown location. Chapter 8. As luck would have it, with my first 5 cards and an overzealous all-in, I managed to amass the entire Saccharin kitty. Ace, 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 and 2 kings. Is that good? That seems good. And I've never been more delighted to hear my kids groan, never more thrilled to see dancing in their eyes disbelief amidst flickering flame. Yeah, Dad, they said, that's called a full house. You win. Chapter 9. A poem about dog-earing books, which some people swear is a sin, but if anything, I would argue, is an expression of gratitude, maybe akin to folding a love note, and that every time the corner of a page is tucked inward, an angel unfolds its wings. Doggone it. Sometimes I have dog-eared my own life, victories, kisses, college, wedding, kids. But most of the time, it seems, it has been dog-eared for me by those careful hands that first broke my spine because somehow they sensed this hard passage where hearts are broken, or this one on which careful tears fall, were crucial to understanding the overall theme or this person's character development. And when someone like that is reading you, highlighting you, underlining you, assuming your intentions between the lines, drawing smiles and frowns in your thin white margins, all you can do is hope that in the end, when they pull you from the shelf and look upon that accordion of corners still folded inward, they will remember why they picked you up in the first place, and they will want to read you again as if brand new and untouched. Chapter 10. As I stood before my personal library this morning, flipping through books as one would a picture album, it occurred to me just how much my bookshelf is like a graveyard of sorts, the authors it houses having long since returned to the earth, except for Billy Collins, that is, and Lawrence Ferlinghetti, that insurgent poet who, without rhyme or reason, at 101 years of age, keeps on ticking and scribbling and ticking off those who refuse to read between the lines, and who once wrote that poetry is the shortest distance between two humans, and that the state of the world calls out for poetry to save it, and that you can conquer the conquerors with words. Chapter 11. Under my son's tutelage, I learned the importance of developing a good poker face, which has everything to do with not letting your emotions get the best of you. Of course, this can be difficult when tensions are high and everything you have is on the table. And isn't everything on the table? Isn't that why God dealt us Christ, whose words alone can command rivers and turn all things for our good? And who, by the way, never tips his hand and never folds, and whose only rule is be still, which is a really good rule to abide by, even when you are not playing poker. Chapter 12. About that graveyard, though. Walt Whitman beside Robert Frost, who was next to Mark Twain, who was next to Zora Neale Hurston, who was rubbing shoulders with Mary Oliver and Emily Dickinson, not even a millihellen apart. And then on my upper shelf, like tombs on a high hill overlooking a city, the larger tomes, my humble homage to Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, those rare teachers of humanity who could write inspired for 1,000+ pages. And below them, on a shelf by themselves, like a series of white crosses along the highway, somber, sacred, serene, my collection of books by Brian Doyle, who is also one of the greatest witnesses of humanity I've read, and whose memory and dirt are still fresh, and whose loss still stings because I once had the chance to meet him, but went to work instead, which to this day is one of my greatest regrets, and whose life, if anything, was a long and winding run-on sentence that was really just getting going before the almighty editor decided it was enough and cut his contributions short. Of that day I am still without words. Chapter 13. And he was still, the master that is, even on the threshold of that inevitable, formidable all-in, when the pot was much bigger than the viewing audience could see, and the stakes seemed too high, and all he had was a pair of kings, and sick to his stomach, he was not sure if they would be enough, or with the hand dealt him whether or not the victory would be his. But the kings had to be enough, and the victory had to be his, and there could be no other way, right? Right? Chapter 14. Speaking of ways, it recently occurred to me that when I die, I will likely be in the middle of a book somewhere, halfway through a chapter or worse, mid-sentence, and all of the characters will be left behind, suspended without warning in the midst of doing what they had waited pages to do, between the covers perhaps, locked in a warm embrace or with their lips on the verge of touching ever so lightly, as that long-awaited kiss must wait even longer, which makes me want to read voraciously and never leave a page unturned, and which leads me at last to share this personal piece in medias res. When my grandpa died, I was in the midst of reading him, but never got to the conclusion. My brother's heart stopped in the prologue, my uncle's just before chapter 42. And only once was I really aware of the last page turning, as I watched the man after whom I was named slip from his bed on earth and into the arms of that great librarian in the sky. And I remember how his face turned blank, that final silent page, and how the nurse cried when she said he was gone, it was over, the end. And how between the seams I knew she was wrong, that I had just read one of the best books ever written, and that in some other place his story was just beginning. But dear God, how I wish I'd turned more corners inward. How I wish I'd highlighted more of his days. Epilogue. Like a thief in the night, Scripture says. That's how Christ will come again to open the graves. So permit from me yet another vision of how heaven might appear. This time like a great hall, but with bookshelves lining the walls, stretching on without end. At least no end as far as our eyes can see. And up and down the main floor, organized in rows also without end, a medley of round tables so that everyone who wants a place has one. And sitting up front at one table in particular, Dickinson, Oliver, and Frost, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, and Brian Doyle? Hey, Brian, it's me. You came to my school once, but I never got to meet you, and I'm so sorry, but I've read all of your books, and... To which he might reply, you've read all my books? Then you've met me. And at another table, Twain and Collins, Hurston and Whitman, and even a few I don't recognize because I'm not as well read as maybe I should be. And then at other tables still, my grandpa and my uncle who eagerly shows me his arms all without holes, just whole, all whole. And next to him his girlfriend and my brother, dear brother, and you, and you, and you, and her way over there, and him, and her, and him. And at the center of each table, a deck of cards with which everyone begins to play almost instinctively. Cut, shuffle, deal, ante up, check, call. Because why not pass the time in this manner, exchanging with loved ones reunited, stories about our own telluric flops and turns while we look for the river card to reveal a winner. In this setting, then, imagine the main double doors into that room suddenly opening in unison, and then a hush falling over the gathered crowd because it becomes clear in that moment that this is the last person from Earth walking through the gates. Lawrence Ferlinghetti, perhaps, whose place at one of the tables has been reserved for a really long time, but who kept refusing to go as only a true insurgent artist would. Reluctant still, he finds a seat, then raises a glass. To life! The chatter picks up. A new game ensues. But just as the last group at the first table reaches to flip over the last card of the first game, the doors into that room swing open wide once again, And from behind everyone, the books on the shelves too, like little doors of their own. And between the covers, their pages begin to flip and flutter from beginning to end, and leaping from those pages as they turn, every written word. All of them love notes in one way or another, swirling, twining, combining just outside the margins of our understanding into one incredibly complex run-on sentence. Until, that is, to everyone's astonishment, in the midst of those words, no, in place of those words, the author of our salvation appears, our ace in the hole, our king of hearts. Neither whisper nor breath is heard, just his naked feet as he lightly steps between the lines of people, then proceeds to pull up a chair at the head of the main table, at which you and I in royal robe are suddenly present. He looks around, into our eyes, those searching windows of the soul through which we see him even as we are seen. And then, without a word himself either, only this subtle smile superseding his usual poker face and an understanding wink in Ferlinghetti's direction, he takes away our face cards, all of them bluffs anyway, then lays down his hands and announces before a full house his victory at last. Read 'em and weep, boys. And then again, but this time motioning at the throng of storied faces now kneeling before him. Read them, he pleads, and weep.